Welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics who write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs, and currently I'm teaching entrepreneurship at Vinh University in Hanoi, Vietnam. Today's guest is Justin Evans, author of the book, The Little Book of Data, Understanding the Powerful Analytics that Fuel AI, Make or Break Careers, and could just end up saving the world. Justin, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
Oh, it's a pleasure, and it can't be more timely, especially with me teaching at a business school in Vietnam and everybody worrying about what AI is going to do to their careers. Because parents are always asking me everywhere I speak, what should my child major in? And all these business analytics majors, what are they going to do with AI being able to do a lot of what they can do? So I'm so excited about your book. I think it's a must read, especially for college educators and kids going into school, focusing on computer science and business analytics. So let's start off with you telling us about your professional background and how you got to where you're at right now.
Well, I ended up working at the Nielsen Company shortly after graduating for business school and spent 7 years kind of immersed in doing an apprenticeship, if you will, in the data industry. Nielsen, of course, is the giant TV ratings company that's now got a grocery division and a TV division. And I just found kind of early on the ability to be creative with data and find different uses for it that would make money. I would talk to a lot of clients and understand what they needed and would learn to apply data to their problems and monetize it through the company I was working for. So I worked for Nielsen, and then I got into digital advertising, the digital media market through an ad network, and then Comcast, and then Samsung, where I was for the last 7 years. And along the way, I spent a lot of time in rooms with clients who were expert on their business, but not expert on data. And being an English major who is also steeped in data, I kind of became the person that my companies look to explain the complicated idea to the client. And that's become my core expertise and is now the heart of my own data consulting practice called the Data Story Group.
Well, let's jump into your book. In part one, How We Got Here. What inspired you to begin the book with your own colonoscopy experience? And what does that story reveal about how deeply data has entered into our daily lives? And if you can also talk about why you even wrote this book.
Yeah, I mean, why I wrote the book, I just started to see in my business life that really talented people were being kind of weeded out from the career path because they didn't understand data. They would admit that they were overwhelmed by it, they didn't understand it. It felt like some different language that they couldn't speak. And so they dropped out. And I thought that was a pity. And I'm also very much an advocate for the use of data. And I see use cases for data everywhere in every possible profession. And so I just felt like someone needs to play the role of translator from the complexity of the data world to the business and normal world of people, regular people and leaders who are not experts in data. So over time, I just started sketching out, Mark, what were the 20 key ideas that I felt like I've observed in my career. And then I started attaching stories to it so that each lesson could be told not just a bunch of dry things you need to memorize, but as narratives about people who were themselves data seekers, who were people who were doing extraordinary things with data. So that was really why I got to the book. And I found that as I was blogging and kind of developing the voice for the book, I ended up interweaving a lot of my own, maybe not a lot, but some of my own personal experience and my personal voice into the story. So I really went hard at it, Mark, with the first chapter and decided to start with the day I got a colonoscopy. And I used this as an experiment, like looking at call it the 3 or 4 hours, 5 or 6 hours it took me to get a colonoscopy, get there and go home. What was all the data that was collected about me in that round trip? And of course, the metaphor is, data is a little invasive, and it captures things about you, whether you like it or not. Again, not unlike an invasive medical procedure that's taking pictures of your insides.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting way to start. You compare data to electricity. Why is that analogy so powerful, and where does it break down?
Well, the reason why electricity and data, I think, are analogous is that they have become a platform for many modern applications to rest or to be founded on. Uh, Electricity powers all the appliances from stuff on the farm to stuff in the home, and we don't even see it anymore. And of course, it's completely old hat. But we have to remember that there was a point where it was not only a novelty, but a revolution. And I think that's true of data as well. Data collection is happening in every part of our lives, and it's it's just something that's happening naturally. It's kind of invisible to us in the same way electricity is. Data gathering is happening on our smart devices, on everything we touch that's internet connected, frankly, everything we touch that's related to a record, whether it's paper or digital. And sort of like electricity, it's sort of happening in the walls. It's not happening right in front of us. So it's an incredibly powerful force in our lives, but it's not one we can really see, touch, and feel. And to go back to your earlier question, that's why I thought it was instructive to kind of go back in time and talk about how we got here. For your listeners, I sort of go on a journey starting more or less from the Library of Alexandria all the way up to the present moment and describe the kind of key milestones in the journey of data and how we got to a world where data is so prevalent.
Yeah, and now I'm touching on that as the next question. The story of the Library of Alexandria plays a major role in the book. What can modern leaders learn from Ptolemy's about collecting and preserving information?
So the Library of Alexandria was number one, really fun to research. Uh, I'm fixated on it because growing up, my father, who was a professor, talked about the Library of Alexandria and how it burned and how all the Greek tragedies were lost on papyrus scrolls. He talked about that as sort of a major kind of break in the civilization continuum. And so he talked about it with a lot of emotion, and it always stuck with me. And so when I looked at it for my purposes, the library represents this vast storehouse of data. It's all these papyrus scrolls with metadata, these pinakes that capture the descriptor of the scrolls. And it's a metaphor for laboriously, wonderfully inefficiently, sometimes criminally acquired and stored data. And the I think that the what remains true. So the Ptolemies, for instance, would were kind of book pirates. So anytime you went in and out of to Alexandria, for instance, in Egypt, the the boats, the ships before everyone disembarked, everyone's goods were searched for books and scrolls. And if they found a valuable book and scroll, the Ptolemies would have their thugs take the scroll, copy it for you, and then give you the copy, and they would keep the original. So there's this sort of greed for information and for data in that setup. And so I think what we've definitely left behind is the inefficiency. So to maintain the Library of Alexandria required the resources of an empire, and to store a single play like Antigone would take hundreds of people, if not thousands, on an annual basis. Now, to store Antigone on a digital device costs a fraction of a penny. But what I think we've kept is some of that greed, frankly. The There was a technical leader that I quote in the book who, when he talked about the big data revolution that happened about, I don't know, 2015, the mantra for big data is anything you can keep, you should keep, because you never know what use it's going to be. And that I think is really the the way we can, and with certain important qualifications should, think about data today. I think it's, for instance, very problematic when the federal government starts destroying or tearing down databases that can be useful to scientists. And in a business sense, most businesses today, their business is fueled by data. It's fueled by their interactions with their customers and their marketplace, all of which is recorded by data. And you have to set aside the things that are sensitive, and you have to set aside the other things that regulation and standards require. But at the same time, this data is really your expression of your business. It's kind of the record of your business, and it's useful in innumerable ways.
Do you remember in the beginning of the internet, one of the big things that everybody was excited about was you would no longer get ads that you didn't care about? That because they knew what you were interested in, they were only going to feed you information. Like you're looking up Swiss Army backpacks, and you'll just get ads about backpacks until you find a backpack, right? And now
Right.
people are angry that they're holding this information. And I tell my students, I said, everybody was elated that this could now happen for you, that everything would
Oh,
be, articles that you'd be interested in. Now they knew what you would be interested, and they can feed you a steady stream of what interests you. And now they're the bad guys for having all this information. So I find it interesting about how that's changed over time. Herman, I hope I'm pronouncing this right. Howarth transformed the census process and eventually helped create what became IBM. Why is his story so important to understand in today's data-driven world?
well, what Herman Hollerith did when he worked for the Census Bureau was to identify a way to store and analyze data in an efficient way. Before that, the census was effectively a giant paper filing cabinet. And Herman Hollerith, as the population grew and as the number of characteristics that were recorded about Americans increased, he realized that he was doing the calculus that the number of calculations would take the whole census staff decades to actually complete. And so he came up with this brilliant punch card system. He invented the punch card. And it would take every census interview and turn it into a series of punches on a card. And then the arm would come down with a set of pins, and wherever the pins could go through and make a connection, then that represented the box that was checked effectively. And so it converted what we would now call unstructured data, or effectively unstructured data, into data that was stored and manipulable. And that was really the big moment. It's kind of the big bang for that relationship we had with data. Uh, and let me put it even more kind of grandiose terms. It was our first time having a relationship with technology that enabled us to manipulate data at scale.
Tim Berners-Lee's work at CERN, and you have to tell him what CERN stands for, changed how information is shared globally. What lessons can innovators learn from his persistence despite initial resistance?
Well, I love the Tim Berners-Lee story. I'm not really sure. He basically, Tim Berners-Lee is an, as far as I can tell, an unassuming, mild-mannered handsome and well-spoken Brit who did not make billions on the internet, even though he invented it. So CERN, I can't remember what it stands for. It's an acronym, CERN, is a giant European science facility best known for its particle collider. And as I joke in the book, it's hard to upstage a particle collider, but he managed to do it. And his job was to create some kind of an interface, a technology interface between all the scientists there, because everyone's notes were kind of ending up in siloed offices and no one was communicating. But you have these brilliant physicists dealing with these um, other teams of brilliant physicists, but working on different projects. And what if they could collaborate? And how do we know what everybody's doing? So he came up with this structure where he would digitize all the records that folks were using, and he would give them a unique locator called a URL. And then he created an interface between such documents, and that was HTTP, I think. And then he had the language for digitizing the documents themselves, and that was called HTML. And as we know from using the internet, the building blocks of the internet. So he just built this as an internal kind of knowledge management system for CERN. And actually, the folks at CERN didn't like it. I think he lost his job. I forget the details of his departure. But in any case, the project was a failure, but he thought he really had something and went off and effectively enabled the internet to be built the way we know it today with those three tools. And what that did was enabled anything connected to the internet to become a creator of documents and therefore a creator of data. And so, as those of us who are old enough to remember the beginning of the internet days, each one of those server calls rendering this ugly page, often with a black background, were reflecting documents that were stored. And of course, now where it's not just web pages, but anything coming off your smartphone and every single document and database inside a corporation and science and government, it's all stored. And of course, it's almost really an infinite amount of data. But it all came from that sort of three-part setup that Tim Berners-Lee crafted in the late 80s.
Just for people who wanted to know what that actually stood for, it's actually European Organization for Nuclear Research. So it was the Council of European Organization for Nuclear Research. That's what it actually stood for.
I never would
That
have got, if you put a
acronym.
gun to my head, I wouldn't have got there, Mark.
Yeah, the beauty of the internet, of course, and the beauty of using Claude to tell you quickly. Many people think the data revolution happened suddenly. What are some key milestones that show it was actually a gradual transformation? And I also wonder if this was a nine-inning baseball game, where are we at in this transformation?
Well, I guess that implies that there's an end. Uh, so I think that's a trick question. Um, well, we're talking about the milestones now. The Library of Alexandria was one. Herman Hollerith was another. Tim Berners-Lee was another one. And I think the creation of the GPU, the graphics processing unit that was developed for video games, but was able to do compute at the speed that is required by AI was another huge one that happened uh, as development for Atari in 1987, I think. Um, I think we've lived through a couple now. I think November 2022, when ChatGPT was dropped by OpenAI, was certainly one of those mega moments, and we may see others coming soon. But the what's interesting though is that a lot of the concepts around AI are not new. One of the things I really enjoyed learning about in the book was about how much these concepts had been anticipated by Alan Turing, by Charles Babbage and Ada Lovelace, and other people who were really thinking about computers uh, as more than the calculators, which is really the way they started. In fact, computers used to mean people who computed, people who would sit with a ruler and whatever other tools to do multiplication. Ironically, Alan Turing himself was known to be a complete slob, ink-stained, bad letter writer, and also a terrible computer. So the fact that he invented the computer at the University of Manchester was a bit of a historical irony. In any case, he and some of the others I mentioned were thinking about artificial intelligence as early as the 1940s and before, 30s and 40s and before. And their notion was like, if you have what's the way he framed it was more or less like, how could you have a computer that can answer anything? And the answer is you can do it if you can have infinite storage and unlimited computational powers. And if you have those conditions, which of course seem just theoretical in 1949, you can achieve artificial intelligence. But Alan Turing was thinking about a very modern, very 21st century structure of a relationship between compute and data. And he described this kind of monstrous machine, if you remember this part of the book, Mark, where
Yeah.
it's like it's got a camera for eyes and a microphone for a mouth and um, speak receptors for ears and clamps for hands. And he kind of envisioned this sort of robot trolling the countryside, recording how humans interacted and then learning from it and itself learning to engage, which is not a terrible metaphor for what we built with artificial intelligence, where we've got a model on the inside, we're feeding it data, and there's a certain amount of imitation, to use a Turing-esque word, or training, as we would put it, to improve the way the robot interfaces with the world in a much more natural way. So there's something about that arc, that historical arc that included Alan Turing and others, that takes us to this current moment of artificial intelligence that I found instructive. And it's important to remember that these ideas run deep. It's not some set of tricks that are being imposed on us by a bunch of people in Silicon Valley today. They're really fundamental to our pursuits as scientific humans.
As we've been watching and reading about how companies are using AI, it seems that they're more bent on how to reduce cost than really harness the brain power of the people that are working for them. I mean, all you read about is Amazon letting 10,000 people go. All these companies using it in essence, improve the bottom line, but not really keeping those same people and all the expertise they've developed, and now saying to them, hey, what's great about this is you keep your job, but now we're freeing you up to think more, to create new products, services, and more efficiencies for us. What's your take on this?
I think there are a couple of things that work here. One, I'm with you. I'm much more interested in the use cases that are, call it more creative, more generative. Uh, but there are even a lot of interesting use cases that have to do with efficiency. There are a lot of financial services companies now that are scoring loans or placing debt in an automated fashion. There's one service where a small business can upload their financials right into a document and get scored for a loan and receive credit uh, in effectively in hours and days versus weeks and months, which is wonderful. And really, that's happening because they're able to automate the function of that analyst or set of analysts that would otherwise be, putting a loan score on the on that applicant. So that's sort of a mix. I mean, I think there's something wonderful about the like an efficient application like that, or an application for efficiency like that, and others that I've written about in my Substack, the data story, and those can be biometrics like this company Whoop or the Oura Ring that you're familiar with, or taking biometrics, turning it into rest, sleep, and recovery scores. Those are delightful to learn about. But at the same time, I think the second point here is that there's a paradox in what we're doing, because we're in effect right now in the process of replacing our lowest level apprentice workers. So when you look at an application like Harvey, which is a tool for law firms, it's replacing the painstaking, backbreaking, work all night associate work of coming through 10 crates of documents and discovery and turning that into summaries. It's doing that on a bunch of PDFs with an LLM. And so on the one hand, I guess it's nice not to stay up all night as an associate, but that and other what we would call low-level work is now simply being automated. So it's kind of breaking the pyramid of knowledge and apprenticeship in our businesses. So if you replace 80% of your associates, who's going to be the person to come up and have the expertise at the junior and senior partner level to continue the business? It's sort of a problem that we're not thinking about so much, but it's prevalent in every sector. I see it even in advertising, where advertising agencies are taking the workflow of an ad agency, turning it into a tool, and automating a lot of their ad agency processes. But how are they doing that? They're doing that by sitting down their experts and grilling them for a week and understanding everything they do and why they do it. And so they've effectively taken their expert and put their expert in a box, in a bot. And one wonders what will happen when those experts are no longer paid by the organization, and they no longer have as much organic interaction with the business day to day. And then, so who are you going to put in the bot 2 years from now? I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out from a human capital perspective in industry.
You introduce readers in part two, good and bad data people. You introduce readers to both data bullies and people who use data responsibly. What inspired this contrast?
Hmm. Mark, it's just based on what I saw in the early days of my career. Sorry about the authentic Manhattan background noise. Um, Early in my career, I mean, I tell the stories in the book. I had two experiences that are very formative for me. One was, that's not in the book, is when I first started my job at Nielsen. I kind of walked in as like the strategy guy working for the corporate team, uh, into a big strategy project that was being done by McKinsey. And on one side of the room was the McKinsey consultants who broke everything into three parts and always used MBA jargon. On the other side were the Nielsen executives who spoke data jargon and all these acronyms that were terms of art for the business. And they were kind of using their respective jargons as power. The Nielsen's, for whatever reason, were resistant to the recommendations of the McKinsey team. And so they were trying to kind of dazzle them with jargon to kind of keep them at bay. And then subsequently, a few years later, the company was taken over by private equity. And everybody knows what happens when you get taken over by private equity.
Yeah.
They cut as many heads as they can. So the private equity guys who were writing these huge checks to buy Nielsen were, they wanted to learn about the business. So how did they learn about the business? They would set up in the boardroom and have all these bankers and private equity guys and lawyers sometimes on one side. And then like one lone executive would come and sit on the other side of the table. And so if you're that executive, what are you doing? Because you're trying not to get fired. You're trying to show that you have so much expertise that no one can ever possibly replace you. Sorry, the story's going a little long. But what would happen is the expert would try and sound fancy about everything they did. Well, we use 4 different models and 100 different data sets, and it's very complicated. And what I saw, I suppose one doesn't like to make corporate raiders like KKR and Blackstone into the heroes, but they were the hero of the story. These really, really smart guys, and they were mostly guys, would say, "Huh, four models and 100 data sets? That's interesting. What's the most important data set?" Well, it's the demographic database. All right, let's start with that one. Tell me about the demographic database. And they would go through every frickin' one of the databases and every one of the models until they, the non-expert sitting across the table, really understood what the thing is, what the model was, what the product was, the data product was. And this to me was a lesson. It was a lesson that all of us can be bullied by people who have more knowledge than us, who are talking to us about a topic that's already intimidating and complex. But if we slow it down, own our own intelligence, ignore the part of our brains that says you really should not ask the 17th dumb question on this topic. And when you do that, you can penetrate and you can understand anything. And if, by the way, doing that and you can't penetrate, that means something's wrong. And the person you're talking to is probably dishonest and probably trying to deceive you, which is information in itself. So
I,
that I think that was just a powerful, for me, that has been a very, very powerful structure about how to look at knowledge in the data space because it is so intimidating and we have to break through somehow because we have to understand these things for ourselves.
how can leaders identify when data is being used to manipulate rather than inform?
I think you touched on it a few beats ago when you talked about data collection, Mark.
Hmm.
The main way I see data being used that I disapprove of is when it's being collected in surreptitious or untransparent ways. Uh, there are companies who are tracking parts of your experience on their service or are setting up ways for you to touch their service in ways that you don't understand, like you think you're turning off the app, but it really never turns off in the background. Or you think you've given permission to collect certain types of data, but it's collecting data in a much, much broad way, much, much broader way. And that over overreach in terms of data collection means they have more insight about you than you've bargained for. And I think that's one very explicit way that companies can use manipulation. And that's the one I'm most familiar with. I mean, and then other angles that I would cite are ones that you know as well as I do that, with the bubbles we create for ourselves and our social choices, the rabbit holes that we can be offered as part of kind of a recommendation cycle, those can have nefarious side effects that other people have written much better things about it than I can and have. Um, but those are some of the ways that it can be used for manipulation. And I think the main thing I put across in the book is less about analyzing all that, which again has been done better by others, but more that as a trade, people who work in data and AI should have a code of ethics, if only at the individual level, that there are things that we will and won't do, and there are things that we do and don't approve of. And inside our organizations, we have a voice and can have a massive impact on the things a company is willing and unwilling to do. And I've seen people who have been uncomfortable with the work their companies are doing and they've walked or just, yeah, left the companies. And I think that should be a vivid North Star for everyone who works in data and AI, that they should hold themselves to their own ethical and moral standards.
What qualities, and I think a lot of the listeners, people who read this book, want to know the answer to this. What qualities separate great data professional from someone who is simply technically skilled?
Well, I've hired and fired hundreds of. I don't think I've fired hundreds of people. I've hired and reorganized, and sometimes fired hundreds of professionals in this space. And the three things I think I'm always solving for as a boss are passion. Really, everybody on my team that was going to go anywhere was somebody who just loved what they did, loved data, could geek out about it all day long. They would whiteboard, they would debate, they would discuss, they would brainstorm. Passion was a critical quality. The second was curiosity, and it goes along with passion, but it's you have to keep delving and understand how the data works and why it works the way it does, and not accept things. You have to look upstream and downstream. Your data is always coming from somewhere. What was the methodology with how it was harvested, how it is stored? Is it changed as it passes hands to reach you? That kind of thing. And what happens downstream for that matter. Um, and to have that kind of curious mind enables you to not make mistakes and look for root causes. And I think finally it was really about the work ethic. We're did that passion and curiosity translate into shipping product and making a difference in the world? So those are the three things that I think make a great data person. If you have, um, and maybe the fourth would be the ethical code that I was talking about. So if you have great skills, passion and curiosity, but no ethics, that can be a bit of a dangerous recipe.
A lot of parents pushing their kids into data analytics. So, if someone wants to become a trusted data leader, what habits should they start developing today?
Well, the strength that I emphasize in my book is that business leadership or nonprofit or scientific or academic leadership should be coupled to data expertise in a comfortable, loose fashion. The two should dance together, business and technical expertise. Really, what drives a great data product and a great data application is an incisive understanding of the business problem or the scientific problem, what have you. What are we trying to create? What are we trying to solve? Seldom do you have success when you just look at the technical problems related to a data set. I think you can start the other way and start with data and kind of play the game of what problem can I solve with this? But always in the end, to create value, you have to have the challenge in mind. And that sounds very easy and even cliche. Like, yeah, like what does the client want? Like, whatever. What are you trying to solve? But in fact, it requires a lot of discipline and a lot of guts, I think, in the sense that in many of the business challenges I've solved over my career, I was, wrong three times before I got it right the fourth time. And the fourth time getting it right it was often with the input of many people. So it requires a certain durability of ego, a certain ability to self-edit. And so for young people coming up in the world of data, I would not only focus on my technical expertise and doing the math and doing the coding, I would start disciplining my mind about what exactly is the business problem we're going to solve. Okay, if solving it in way A didn't work, what's way B? And what's way B plus A? And you have to have this kind of dogged clarity about solving these problems. So I think those two go hand in hand.
Do you read other things besides like data related things that impact how you interpret data?
Oh yeah, I'm a huge reader. Uh,
Right. And I'm guessing
yeah.
your dad must have been an English professor.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, you noticed all the English literature references at the
Yeah,
beginning of every chapter or
yeah.
section. Yeah, I'm a huge reader. I I don't read as much fiction as I used to, but yeah, I read tons of nonfiction. I'm slugging my way through both a biography of Thomas Jefferson and uh and that book about, oh, I can't remember the name of it. So the book about like you shouldn't give a fuck. I can't remember what it's called by Mark Manson, published 10 years ago.
Uh-huh.
Um sorry, was that are we now going to get in trouble with the FCC? Um
No worries.
um yeah, so I read a lot and I it's I think I hope a lot of that showed up in the books or the wide frame of reference. I think it makes it fun.
Because I keep wondering if students who go into this only read about how to manipulate numbers, that their creativity stops, that you reading books and a variety of things helps you come up with, has you ask questions about the data that may not have been considered if you were myopic in how you looked at things. That the fact that you're well read, does that help create your creativity in terms of interpreting numbers and coming out with cool information?
Hmm. I think it does. But I also think that creativity shouldn't be seen just as a talent that only certain people have.
Right.
I mean, I play music and I used to paint and I write fiction, and so I'm kind of
But
decidedly
the more you
a creative
expose
type.
yourself to all these different things, does that help you in the work that you do?
Well, where I was going to go is I actually think creativity is can be a skill. And I really loved this one section of a book by Charles Duhigg where he talks about the movie Frozen. And the movie Frozen was a huge hit for Disney. It was written by Jennifer Lee, who later became the head of the studio and the animation studio. And what she did was she took what Disney movies did well, like Princess and the Frog and Beauty and the Beast, like a male female romance pairing. And I don't know why the men always have to be animals, but I guess that's part of the obstacles they have to overcome. Um, and the and she gave it a twist and she made it the Frozen was really a relationship story but about two sisters, right? And the lateral step she took from male female romance to female female sister story was not, she didn't break what Disney was great at, but she made an adjustment to it. And what I often see in business creativity, Mark, is it's more of that kind of lateral step. Can we take something that really worked in direct marketing and put it in the digital environment? Can we take something in genomics and see if we can make that work in grocery store data? And those lateral moves, I think, are the type of creative process that anyone can master. You don't have to be a creative person. So I guess, I don't know, to answer your question, does reading widely uh, fuel your creativity? Sure. It gives you more frame of references to take more lateral steps.
I mean, that's why I'm encouraging my students to travel and see things more. Because, like, I have a brilliant student, and he doesn't like to travel at all. And I said, I think your mind will come up with more things. Or a musician that stuck in terms of writing, that if they did different things, it might open up ideas they never considered before. They don't have to be the most creative. It's just trying different experiences that could lead to maybe breakthroughs in how you take a look at the puzzle of math.
And why do you have to push it so much with them, Mark? Is it because they are just want to know about math and they're hell bent on being the best math person ever?
Yeah, I think they're so focused on the numbers, and they do so little reading and sometimes so little travel that. and they think just being good at numbers is the solution. But my feeling is they have a wide breadth of experiences, um, uh, either in person, going to places, or taking up an instrument, or taking up Brazilian jiu-jitsu, or whatever it might be,
Yeah.
and that will help them because I find that I've done 30 startups and not one of them was something I was an expert in. It's just that I observe things and come up with ideas based on it. But if I didn't do all these different things, I would never come up with the ideas that I come up with that get funded.
And I'm interested what the dialogue is like with the student when you make that argument that they need to have a wider frame of reference. What happens? How do they respond?
Um, some of the students, especially the female students, really embrace that.
Hmm.
The guy students are like, "Ugh, that sounds like a lot of work to me. Why can't I just be good at this? Why isn't this
Hmm.
sufficient?" And I even tell them in their own personal lives, with their own relations with other people, it makes them more interesting. It makes them smarter. And it makes them happier at the end of the day. So I say professionally, this is going to really benefit you. You just have to put yourself out there. A lot of them are risk adverse, and
Hmm.
so they hate
Hmm.
to fail at anything. And I'm at a school that's like Harvard, where all the kids, were 15, 50. I mean, I actually met for the first time in my life somebody who scored 1,600 in the boards, and three people this week who had 15, 80, 85, and 90 in it.
Yeah.
And yet they're just spending more time studying than experiencing. And so I tell them, worry less about the grades and more about life experience.
Yeah, there's a lot packed in there. I mean, it feels like there's a lot of culture packed into that. Um, a lot of kind of professional talk about dogged, a lot of professional doggedness in that, and you can't fault somebody for having that level of success and accomplishment. Yet, yet and one also doesn't want to make the argument that these things are only exist to get us ahead in some other sort of indirect way to success. Like they have their own value, and it's hard to that's sort of a long argument with a lot of cultural assumptions that's required. So I'll be
Yeah,
interested. I'll be interested to hear what arguments you find are successful in that area.
yeah, I try. All I tell them is my job is to maximize your potential, and and let's not limit what you could do, and don't limit your own thinking about what you think you're capable of. So if they find that they're good at one thing, then they just hold on to it like they're hugging a tree in a storm, as opposed to taking additional risk and find out they're actually good at more than what they thought they were or what their families thought they were. Uh, Back to the book, part three, superpowers. You describe data as a kind of superpower. What makes data different from other business tools?
Well, I think it's embedded in one of the superpowers itself, which is omniscience, that allows us to see far-flung parts of our domains. In a business world, that could be a business leader sitting in an office and having data that expresses how well every single store is doing in their empire. And therefore, in a sense, having eyes on the ground in each one of those locations. You could do the same, you could say the same thing about an ocean monitor, or which is one of the databases that was just shut down, or uh, a credit score, which is taking the way you in effect, putting the credit company on your shoulder as you pay your bills day after day, month after month, and seeing the regularity of that. So in a way, it becomes this tool for leaders to have omniscient vision for really important areas of experience, and therefore to do analysis, do scores, make decisions that affects the whole domain. And that's really the core construct of what data enables us to do.
Which of the data superpowers discussed in the book has the greatest potential to improve society?
Well, I mean, I definitely think that omniscience is the one. So the four are omniscience, data acts like light in a dark room, data tells us where to put resources, and data crystallizes complex information. So they're all very important and in some ways arguably overlapping. Um, but omniscience, as I said a moment ago, feels like the core. It enables us to make decisions about any event anywhere.
What role does storytelling play in helping people understand complex data?
Well, it can either you can either walk a client, I'll use that example, through step by step how data works in a clear storytelling manner, or you can summarize it with an analogy. Either way, it's crucial to meet the client or the audience where they are and explain these complex ideas in a way that makes sense to them. To dazzle them and walk away is not the goal. The goal is to get them to understand, to empower them, and to make them feel comfortable. I think you had mentioned somewhere the light in the dark room metaphor. It really shows us that the chapter of the book deals with George Akerlof's essay, the lemons problem, which is about used cars. And so the lemons problem is that like a used car salesman knows whether the car is a lemon. You don't know whether the car is a lemon, and that information asymmetry and that lack of trust creates market problems. And that's really a role that data plays in the way we interact with each other in a business standpoint. So when you're articulating what your data does and what it is, you have to be clear to bridge that information asymmetry gap. So in my case, I was often selling data or a product based on data. And if I didn't explain it and I didn't bring the client's blood pressure down and make them feel calm and trusting, then they were not going to buy. And so optimizing my own internal algorithm, I always steered towards being clear and simple in order to make the client feel comfortable so that they would do business with us.
Which real-world example in this section surprised you the most while researching the book?
I absolutely loved writing about the technology nonprofit Climate Trace. Climate Trace has one of the smartest methodologies I've ever heard. It would probably take more time than we have to explain. But in effect, they're buying satellite data and turning it into an estimate of how much each factory and energy plants all over the power plant all over the world is polluting. And I thought that trick of taking satellite data that everybody has, combining it with other data and understanding how every single polluter in the world is polluting, I thought was really extraordinary. And by the way, it was really fun to learn about the background of the satellite industry, which is just cool. It starts with the U.S. Geological Service, which was effectively map making in the 1800s and is now this giant satellite apparatus. Um, so yeah, I think the Climate Trace group, funded by Al Gore, and their methodology is a delight to learn about and a fun website to mess around with too.
You devote separate chapters to counting, tracking, anomalies, identity matching, scoring, certification, and performance. Why are these 8 uses you chose?
As I was sitting there planning the book, I was literally making notes on what are the things, the actions that I would observe as a data professional, and what were the moments like the ahas that I had had over the years. And matching a database is just it's critical to doing anything, at least in advertising and marketing, and I suspect in virtually every other discipline as well. where, for instance, you'll have a list of, to take the direct marketing example, you have a list of names and addresses, and you'll know through the census that this household is a white family making $50,000 a year with two kids and they rent their home. And but now that you have the name and address, there's a lot of other information you can append to that record. You can go to the DMV and understand what car they have, and they can go to product registration databases and know that they have a Samsung washing machine and so forth. And then you can create a more and more rich profile of that household, and that's the matching concept. And so they're matching, counting. It was all these things that are just crucial to understanding about data. It's just like the building blocks, the ABCs of data.
Of all the applications covered in this section, which is how we use data, of all the applications covered in this section, which one affects the average person's life the most without them even realizing it?
I would say scoring. The scoring is a wonderful concept in data because to look at it through the lens of digital advertising, I have $100,000 to spend, excuse me, for my client, and I want to spend that $100,000 on the people most likely to buy a pickup truck. And so I will take a database or a live interaction with advertising opportunities and score each ad opportunity based on how much I think they are likely to buy a pickup truck. And the more people who are in market for a pickup truck that I show the ad to, the more likely my client is to get value from the limited $100,000 they have to spend. And so this sort of balance of resource constraint and opportunity is what scoring is for, because it helps you prioritize. And so we are all being scored all the time based on how much we want to watch the next YouTube video, which one we're most likely to want to watch, what our credit rating is, um, whether we're going to get into Harvard. It's all, we're basically being scored all the time. And the data we're shedding or earning or producing or sharing is contributing to our score. And that's in effect a universal part of life, but it's expressed through this data concept of scoring.
Here's my last question for you. Throughout your career, you've worked at the intersection of technology, business, and data. Looking back, what's the one lesson you learned the hard way that no amount of data could have taught you?
Well, since you've geared a lot of the thinking here towards students, I mean, I would counsel students that it's really, your career is all about relationships. It's You can be wonderfully talented, and that will have people admire you and want to work with you. But over time, it's about the quality of the relationships you establish and maintaining those and investing in those. And over time, they will pay you rewards.
I thank you so much for taking the time. The book was great. I really think a lot of universities need to read the book for their own future planning, and certainly students would benefit by it. So I thank you again for taking the time, and I hope that you'll be writing additional books so I can bring you back again.
Thank you so much, Mark. And it was a real pleasure to talk with you and spend time with you.
Bye, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend. We'll look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care.